tremendous privilege to introduce Doug True, the Chief Nuclear Engineer and Senior Vice President of Generation and Suppliers at the Nuclear Energy Institute, NEI. We're always excited to have NEI speak at our events and offer insight into the nuclear industry. So now the floor is all yours, Doug. Welcome.
Great. Thank you, Vicki. I'm not going to use any slides today. I'll just talk, and then we can have some time for questions at the end if you'd like. I'm very pleased to be here to talk about the nuclear power industry, the nuclear workhorse that's providing the carbon-free core to our electricity grid, and excited about the developments that we're seeing in this industry as we move forward. It's an exciting time in the industry, and we think that there are a lot of positive developments that I'll cover here. I want to start with the current operating fleet. We finished last year generating almost 790 million megawatt hours of electricity at a capacity factor of 92.5%, which are not records of the industry, but they're very close to our all-time highs. And despite the fact we've had some plants shut down over the past few years, the industry performance has continued to be extremely high. In 2020 saw nuclear become the second largest electricity generating source in the United States, behind natural gas, surpassing coal for the first time as coal plants have shut down. That also translated to nuclear continuing to be the largest source of emissions-free electricity in 2020, providing almost 52% of the emissions-free electricity, more than double hydro and wind individually. And we continue to see that high level of performance of generating consistent, safe, reliable power across the last 2 decades that we've seen, where industry performance on the reliability side has been extremely high. For the last 22 years, the industry's capacity factor has exceeded 90%, and then 92.5% last year was continuing to show that strong performance in providing that core of power to our electricity grid. The way we've done that over the years is by operating plants and improving efficiencies. If we look back and compare the nuclear of old to today, we've added effectively 33 new 1,000 megawatt power plants by uprates and improving performance and increasing capacity factors across the industry. And we see with the right policies as we go forward, there's opportunity for to get more out of these plants, see more power uprates, see the output from the existing fleet continue, extend the life of those plants, and have them usher us into the carbon-free future we're moving towards. Last year, we avoided almost 500 million metric tons of CO2 emissions by having nuclear energy in the United States, equivalent to something like 100 million cars emissions. That emission-free aspect certainly is something that we are proud of, and something that we see the current policies being supportive of as we go forward. We've also been working hard as an industry on getting total costs down. Since 2012, total generation costs across the industry have dropped by about 35%. And we continue to see opportunities to take costs out of our operation and maintenance side, and in the long-term fuel costs as well. Our safety performance, which is something that always comes up when we talk about nuclear, is the best in the world. Last year, our Independent Excellence Organization, the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, testified in Congress that as they compare the U.S. industry fleet performance to the rest of the world, it is the best by far across the world. That safety performance and reliability performance is something that we are very focused on sustaining as we go forward, as is, of course, our regulator, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Their performance indicators also show that continued excellent safety performance. And that's something that we continue, as I said, to put emphasis on for the industry and look forward to continuing as we operate these plants for the next 30 to 40 years. We're also seeing some emerging new developments in the operating fleet. We've got several plants across the country looking at using their nuclear plants to generate hydrogen to support at-scale production of hydrogen as the hydrogen sector begins to grow. These are just initial pilots that would need to be scaled up, but there's a lot of interest and opportunity across our fleet and how that can be used as an ancillary product, potentially as a way to use the energy from these plants when we have excess solar and wind, but also just as a separate independent product. Those plants are working through the demonstration process and should have those capabilities online in the next several years. That strong performance has led to a strong bipartisan support. We see a growing appreciation for nuclear's important role, not only in the grid and stabilizing it, but in the decarbonization as we move forward. And the ability of nuclear power as a power source to complement wind, hydro, and solar as we move towards a decarbonized grid. We've gotten very strong support from the administration and on the Hill. Secretary Granholm, in the last 9 months that she's been in place, has repeatedly reiterated the important role of both the current and advanced nuclear have in our decarbonization efforts. And also, although things are obviously still in flux on the Hill, we see strong support there. The current reconciliation bill and the original one includes a production tax credit for nuclear, which will help in leveling the playing field in electricity markets and will help us be able to continue to invest in getting more out of the existing assets. And the infrastructure bill contains funding for advanced reactor demonstrations, which are the gateway to advanced nuclear being deployed more widely. Speaking of advanced reactors, this is an area where innovation absolutely abounds. It's amazing. We have over 20 members of NEI that are out developing different varieties and types of nuclear power deployment possibilities with different use cases, a wide variety of sizes, ranging from single megawatt up to the 1,000 megawatt plants we're used to, with different deployment models that can support different uses. High temperature applications that can give us more efficient hydrogen generation, higher process heats for other industries, as well as the more medium and lower temperature applications that we would use more for electricity. The interesting thing about these is, unlike the plants we have today, there's a totally different cost profile with these that will enable us to be more cost competitive, and that's going to be the key in the U.S. of course, is to keep stay cost competitive, and that comes about particularly on the lower end of the size spectrum by the combination of smaller size and safety profile that comes with these new technologies that allows the plants to be simpler and cheaper and faster to build. So this isn't the same nuclear we've seen in the past. Large light water reactors that we built the industry on. These are much more agile, much more deployable options that we think totally change the future of nuclear as an option. And last year, we were excited about the announcement of the advanced reactor demonstration programs. Bill Gates' company, TerraPower, announcement earlier this year of deploying in Wyoming at a coal power plant site, which we think is a very interesting option. To be able to reuse infrastructure, avoid the need to have to build a lot of transmission, reuse water permits and things that already exist, to be able to deploy technology. And more recent work we've done show that a lot of that workforce is reusable. And one of nuclear's big values is the jobs, the well-paying jobs that we bring along with our facilities. So we've looked at it, and it does appear that when coal sites transition to a nuclear site, much of that workforce can be transitioned, and that workforce will probably be supplemented. I think we're just issuing today maybe a report that shows that a typical coal site of a certain size might have 100 employees. A nuclear plant might take 200, but the vast majority of that original 100 could be redeployed into the nuclear workforce. It's not all nuclear engineers that run nuclear power plants. It's actually a lot of operators and tradespersons that can help us keep those plants running. We're also excited about the X-Energy announcement for the demonstration in Washington State and the UAMPS announcement for their deployment in Idaho. That'll provide us 2 more options in the late 2020s coming online to demonstrate these new technologies. Government support has been beneficial in that, but there's a lot of interest in private investment in these areas, as evidenced by Bill Gates putting his own money where his mouth is to match the government's funding on their deployment in Wyoming. We have nearly a dozen designs working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on licensing at some point or another. And we see these near-term products coming online here at the latter part of this decade, positioning us as we transition into the 2030s for a much broader deployment. But even beyond the U.S., there's a lot of interest in nuclear internationally. And American technology is at the forefront of that interest. Obviously, focus on carbon and the global issues associated with that transcend the United States and affect the entire world, and everyone's looking for options for carbon-free energy. Nuclear power is fundamentally a U.S. technology, and our regulator, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is the global gold standard. So as we get these technologies going here in the United States, we see a great opportunity globally to deploy that. And nuclear deployment is different than some technologies in that it's fundamentally a 100-year relationship between the construction, operation, and deconstruction of the facility and management of fuel. It's about 100 years of engagement. And bringing U.S. options in the form of these new innovative, flexible, and versatile products to these markets across the world, avoid countries having to be tied to countries like China and Russia who are trying to do the same thing. So there's a national security dimension to all of this too, that we can keep our allies fueled and avoid the promulgation of Chinese and Russian technologies into those markets. You've probably been aware of recent announcements in Eastern Europe, Poland and Romania looking at advanced nuclear. They're actually looking at the larger end of the scale with also consideration of some smaller deployments coming along with them. But there's also interest in other continents, Africa, South America, Asia, and other places for these technologies. So at NEI, we're focused on keeping the current fleet running well, enabling the opportunity for these advanced technologies to see the market here quickly in the 2020s, and supporting that global export of nuclear technology around the world. So before just to wrap things up here, we see, frankly, a brightening future for nuclear power. I think we've often termed it as being an inflection point for the industry. That's built on a strong performing fleet that has a demonstrated track record of providing safe, reliable electricity to support the grid. We have these new, novel, cost-competitive products coming online that pair well with renewables to support the longer-term needs of the grid and decarbonization, and the deployment of nuclear technologies into other markets as well to support decarbonization of sectors beyond electricity. The opportunity here also, we think, for the U.S. to reestablish itself as the nuclear technology leader globally. And that's something that we need to take advantage of, as I mentioned, for national security reasons and global security reasons. With that, I'll make this into my remarks and open it up for any questions if you have time.
Doug, thank you. That was very helpful and very informative. I appreciate that you did it with all without slides and and that was great. And I do have some questions, and I think I have one question from the audience that I'm going to give you as well. And I want to just follow on to your last comments and just make it clear to the audience. So, are you seeing a nuclear renaissance due to the fact that nuclear is 100% carbon free and sustainable, non-emitting? Would you call it a nuclear renaissance?
I don't think we're not calling it a nuclear renaissance today. I think that we are at the point where there's a prospect that there could be a return to that. We have work to do to get these designs through the licensing process, accepted and demonstrated. But certainly we think there is an opportunity, in fact, frankly, a need for nuclear in the grid of the future to support and pair with renewables to provide carbon-free and carbon capture where that's applicable as well, to support carbon-free generation of electricity and the other decarbonization needs that are out there.
So you mentioned process, and there is quite a process from the standpoint of nuclear plants. And the important, as you said, for the future, a future of nuclear is to operate the current fleet safely. Can you, I want to bring in the issue of community engagement here.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, from the standpoint of safety and security of nuclear plants, you have plants out operating. Most of the, you know, everyone goes to the issue of nuclear waste, what is done with it. Most of that is contained on site right now.
Mm-hmm.
So from the standpoint of how have you and the industry involved from the standpoint of community engagement and the importance of that, because they're very strongly held views about nuclear, very strong, almost I think stronger than coal to the extent. So can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's interesting. If you look at communities that have nuclear power plants in them today, they're far more supportive of nuclear than communities that don't have nuclear power. So the idea that nuclear is negative in the community that have them is just not there. We actually think that under the banner of environmental justice, nuclear has quite a strong story to tell. We've been working with our members on that. There's work to do to make sure that we do that well and engage communities as we move forward with new opportunities. But if I look at Wyoming and the TerraPower announcement up there, we've got communities in Wyoming vying to be the nuclear deployment center. There are 4 coal sites that are all interested, and the communities around them are all interested in seeing nuclear deployed at those sites. And so I think there's, while there are strongly held views among folks, when it comes down to providing high quality jobs and safe, reliable electricity, I think we have a good story. On the waste front, we're encouraged that the administration has taken some steps to engage in a consent-based approach towards interim storage. We're expecting an RFI to come out any day now from the administration to begin that process. The federal government has a responsibility here that it's nice to see movement on. But the fuel that's on the sites today and the fuels that might be on sites in the future are safely stored, can be stored safely for many decades. We have a strong track record of demonstrating that. They're in essentially disaster-proof containers, protected from all manner of threats. and monitored by the operators. And so far, in the what it is 30 years or so we've been doing this, I've not seen any issues with our ability to store safely the fuel until the government can come up with a solution that they're required to do.
Okay, Doug, so now this next question comes from our audience, and it says, Mr. True, I'm curious about the R&D for nuclear fusion. Do you see a future potential for fusion technology?
Yeah, so I think there's a potential. I got into business, I started working back in 1980, and I think in 1980, fusion was 20 years away. And here we are in 2020, 21, and I think it's probably less than 20 years away. But it still needs some work. There are some exciting things going on in the fusion area, and I think there are some companies with really interesting technologies. And so I think there is a potential, but I think it's a little bit of the early stages to know what that potential really is. Certainly, fusion has always been something that was viewed as the panacea, the energy panacea, and I hope it can come to that, but I think it's a little too early to say that it's going to be the solution.
Doug, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate so much your comments this morning and for being here and presenting. Thank you so very, very much.
Great. Thank you, Vicki.